welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm your host for the next 2 hours, Julie Rendelman. Thank you for being here. We're going to be covering in the next period of time Kentucky versus David Dooley. This is a retrial out of Kentucky in which a woman by the name of Michelle Mockbee was brutally murdered. She was the mother of two. As many of you know, this is a retrial, so I want to bring in Ronn Blitzer while we're waiting for a new witness to take the stand. Ron, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to finally get to be on the show with you. And so, to me, the thing that I find the most fascinating about this case is the reason it's a retrial are two reasons. One is because apparently there was some type of video surveillance from the scene in which an unknown individual came in to the location where the victim was killed. That was apparently not turned over. But the more salacious part of it was that the lead prosecutor was apparently having an affair with the detective, or the main detective, which I think was probably a problem for some of the people, I would guess, which is why we're here now. So, you know, look, I guess the question is, you know, when we talk about these type of cases, you know, do you have any sense of why the judge would have made the call and said, you know what, that relationship in and of itself means we need a new trial, a new fair, and a partial trial?
Now, anything that would give the appearance of some sort of impropriety, I think, is worth taking a look at and, really, trying to see if maybe, we could do something about this. And when you take that in conjunction with the evidence that hadn't been turned over, I think that's enough to force a retrial here. I think if it was just this affair on its own, I personally would strongly argue that that's not enough for a retrial, because what's the argument here? That because they were having an affair, that they were working together, but they're already, a detective and a prosecutor, they're already working together, they're already on the same side.
Right.
So that alone, I don't think would really do it for me. But if you're worried that, the public or, jurors would think that there's some sort of funny business going on and you have evidence that wasn't turned over, I think, it's not a bad decision to have a retrial.
Yeah, it's interesting because, prosecutors, tend to form friendships and relationships with their witnesses. I think the issue becomes, when an individual, takes the stand, are they having some type of relationship that would make them more biased than in other situations? I just got told that we can go back into the courtroom. We have a witness live on the stand, Kentucky v. David Dooley. Let's take a look. And welcome back. That's the detective investigator on the stand talking about the crime scene that he took pictures of. This is the vehicle. I believe it's the victim's vehicle. This is in Kentucky versus David Dooley. I just want to bring in Ronn Blitzer for just a moment. We haven't heard much, which is not, unfortunately, unusual in many murder cases. The prosecution has to lay out its case, and sometimes it requires witnesses that are not that interesting, but that kind of, we hope, will develop into actual evidence. But with that said, the only thing I've heard so far, and we were talking about this off the air, is that the evidence seems to be that the defendant was stealing potentially with his time cards, that the victim found out about it, and this is the motive they're using as to why it is that he basically bludgeoned and killed this woman. Do you think jurors are going to, let's just start with the motive, are they going to buy that as a motive for why someone?
We've seen cases where, there are strangers who were killed and there's no seeming motive. Right. But those cases where there's no known motive sometimes are easier to believe than one where there's a motive that doesn't really seem to justify the act. And I think this is one of them. And, you see, okay, well, they knew each other and she had caught him trying to scam the company, allegedly. And now he was trying to kill her, maybe, to try and cover up his tracks, who knows? But that really seems extreme, because what's going to happen? Maybe, he'll lose his job. Now he's being charged with murder. So it doesn't add up. But at the same time, when you look at someone who is going to allegedly murder somebody, you're already looking at someone who isn't thinking the same way that the average person might think.
Yeah, I agree. Look, I tried many a case where the motive was because someone looked at them funny, and that was the motive, and that was enough for someone to take someone else's life. I agree with you, though. For some reason, maybe because of the brutality of the death, the two don't seem to match. And I guess one of the things I wonder is sometimes a prosecutor gets too stuck to the motive, and the jury may sit there and go, I think he did it, but that doesn't seem to be the motive, and therefore they're unable to find him guilty because the prosecutor chose a motive that wasn't necessarily fitting in with the actual crime.
Yeah, and also when you think about this, if someone was going to kill someone in order to try and get away with something, or in order to get back at someone who caught them doing something, you'd think it would be a little bit cleaner than this. You'd think that maybe they would shoot them once, or try and do something that wasn't as brutal or as personal as beating someone to death. That really looks like something that is based in some sort of real personal animosity.
No, I agree with you, and I think unless one argues that they had an argument then, and in some type of crime of passion, he took the nearest thing he could find and took her life. But hopefully we will see soon enough when we hear additional testimony. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. And so while they go to a sidebar, we're just going to talk a little bit about the case. I have with me my esteemed colleague, Ronn Blitzer. Thank you for sticking with us. Again, what we talked about is, here we have the investigator, and the investigators basically explain to the jury those things that, at the end of the day, perhaps aren't going to lead us to who the person is, but at least explain to the jury all the efforts they took in kind of honing in on who they believe that the only person could be that committed this crime. And so one of the things that I think is important is, my understanding is that the way the investigation worked is that it was a secure facility, meaning that basically you couldn't come in and you couldn't get out without being known. And so what they basically did in their investigation is they ruled out each other person, and so they were left with this one. How do you think that is impacted by the fact now we have new video surveillance that was not shown in the original case that shows an unknown person that is not this defendant attempting to enter that location about 10 hours before she died?
Yeah, that video, the video that had not been turned over when this case was tried the first time, definitely hurts the prosecution's case. But yeah, it's important that they're trying to show how the investigators, ruled out other people and showed this person was in the building, he had access, there was a possible motive, even though, as we discussed earlier, it may not be the strongest one. So at least they're showing that there was some sort of due diligence done here, and they didn't just randomly say, oh, this person must have done it because he was there. They're saying, no, there were a limited number of people who could have possibly done this. This guy was in the place at the time. There was some sort of motive, so we didn't just decide, okay, it's this person. Like, there's a reason to believe it.
Yeah, and I hear you, except if I'm the defense attorney, I'm going to say the minute this guy in the grainy surveillance video comes into play, you have a lack of being able to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. Everything you've done in terms of ruling out everybody else has been completely shattered by this video. And so I guess I'm having trouble. There's no DNA. There's no direct evidence other than some inconsistencies as to why he left. There's nothing on him, no blood, nothing. I'm having trouble figuring out how they're going to get and take that leap to proving this case beyond a reasonable doubt.
They're going to have to try and minimize the effect of this other video and say, okay, yes, there was someone else who had been in the area, but I understand it wasn't at the time of the murder. It was earlier, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Yeah, the defense can try and pound it home and try and force some reasonable doubt here, and they may well do that. But if you're the prosecution, you're going to say, no, this doesn't really mean anything at all. We looked at the actual time and place for who could have been there, and it's this guy.
But okay, you know what? Thank you. We're going to actually take a break, and then we can keep talking about it. It's an interesting topic. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm your host, Julie Rendelman. While Kentucky versus David Dooley takes a break, we're going to take a look back at something that's been going on all day. Many of you know about the Jussie Smollett case. He was arrested and charged with, in Illinois, it's called disorderly conduct, which is a class 4 felony, where he's looking at up to 3 years in jail. There is a press conference that was recently shown. We want to take a look at it, and then we can talk about it.
Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims? Bogus police reports cause real harm. They do harm to every legitimate victim who's in need of support by police and investigators, as well as the citizens of this city. Chicago hosts one of the largest pride parades in the world, and we're proud of that as a police department and also as a city. We do not, nor will we ever tolerate hate in our city, whether that hate is based on an individual's sexual orientation, race, or anything else. So I'm offended by what's happened, and I'm also angry. I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve. Absolute justice would be an apology to this city that he smeared, admitting what he did, and then be man enough to offer what he should offer up in terms of all the resources that were put into this. Thank you.
And those are incredibly strong words about the Jussie Smollett investigation. I want to bring in Ronn Blitzer and talk a little bit about it. You know, it's so true that Chicago could have been so tarnished by Jussie Smollett's accusations. You know, here we had, you know, a community that, you know, the police were involved in this investigation. I'm sure the community was absolutely terrified that something like this could happen to them. So, you know, look, I admit that I was not surprised by any of this happening. I think many of us questioned some of the things he had said from the start. Do you think that it's the norm that police, you know, when they're doing this investigation, are suspect of a case like this, or do you think they go in with eyes wide open, hoping that it's true, and then find out surprisingly that something like this is in fact the sham that it was? I think that without understanding that he has, you know, he hasn't been proven guilty of anything, but I'm sorry, I'm already on board on this one.
Yeah, I think they go in with eyes wide open. They said that they originally looked at it as if, you know, Jussie Smollett was a victim in this case. And, you know, when you have a situation like this where someone is making allegations like this, you have to take them seriously and you do your due diligence. And over the course of this investigation, you know, things didn't add up. And there were a lot of things that didn't add up here. So now, I'm with you. I'm not surprised that it turned out this way, that they were able to kind of unravel this plot. You know, it helped that they were able to find the people who were in on it with him, and then they were able to cooperate and said, okay, here's what really happened. But there were some inconsistencies in some of the reporting initially, some of the details that, you know, were conveniently thrown into the story without, you know, a whole lot of context. You know, didn't really make sense. You know, for me, you know, we talked about the noose, which, you know, is supposed to be like really emotionally charging here. And when, you know, people first heard this, they thought, oh, this is awful, because an allegation like that is awful. But it really, you know, confused me when I heard that he kept the noose around his neck and didn't even notice it being put on at first. That struck me as a little odd.
It seemed like a staged event. You know, look, everyone acts differently when something horrible happens to them. But the fact that knowing that he had that around his neck, he continued to leave it there so he could show it to the police. He could have easily shown it to police without it being around his neck. I guess the question I want to ask is, we're in a world right now where we talk about the Me Too movement, people coming forward all the time, whether it be homophobic behavior, racist behavior, or, sexual harassment and sexual abuse. You have someone who comes in now and has basically lied to the entire community. Does it set us back? Do people start now questioning every person that goes forward with some type of claim, or are we still kind of in that mindset where we're starting to accept various people's claims that we didn't accept before?
I think that we were going a little bit too far in assuming certain allegations, and I think if you look at the Chicago police here, I think they're a model of how this sort of thing should be looked at. You get allegations of something horrible, you take it seriously, whether it's in the Me Too movement or if it's something racial or homophobic or anything like that. When you get these allegations, you take them seriously, you listen to the person who's making the allegations, and then you do a thorough investigation. And that's exactly what happened here. And the next time there's an allegation like this that comes out, I think the police should listen and investigate. And in the next case, maybe it'll be true, maybe it won't. In this case, it doesn't look like it was. I think the police did a great job.
It's such an excellent point, because we talk about prosecutors all the time, getting information, and some don't do the investigation they need to. We've seen it in many cases recently, and I think this really is something that everyone should look at about the right way to do police work and the right way to be a prosecutor. We're going to go back to a clip. I think we're now going to look at Edward Wadnicki. Take a look, and then we'll have a discussion about it.
Forward to the 13th, we had a team in place working with the FBI, Customs, and our partners out at the airport. Airport police helped us tremendously, and we were able to locate and identify these two individuals, these two persons of interest, when they entered back into the country at Customs. We took them into custody. We read them their rights, and they both initially asked for an attorney. They were brought to Area Central Detective Headquarters so that we could process them, and it was at that time that their attorney showed up. I think you've all seen her on the news the last couple of days. She came to us, and after speaking with these two people of interest, she said that something smelled fishy. She did not think that they were the offenders as were reported. She worked with us very, very closely to get to the point where she came to me and said, you really need to talk to these guys. I'm going to allow them to give you a video interview with us present, and we're going to have you hear their story. They are not offenders, they're victims. It was at that time that this investigation started to spin in a completely new direction. You've heard some of the statements that their lawyer, Ms. Schmidt, has made, and it was at that time that we took the information that these two individuals provided to us, and we substantiated the timeline and the details that they gave to us in this interview. We were able to substantiate those things. We worked very, very closely with the State's Attorney's Office. We had been working very, very closely with the State's Attorney's Office for over a week at that point. And it was then on the 15th, Friday the 15th, after approximately 47 hours of them being in custody and hours of them meeting with us and telling us their story and documenting their story, did we release them without charging, and I classified them no longer as suspects or persons of interest and as witnesses. So as is typical with any investigation, one would typically lock these witnesses into a grand jury statement. Monday was a holiday, the 18th. Tuesday was the first day that we could attempt to do that. So we scheduled a appointment with the grand jury, working again very closely with the State's Attorney's Office in this. And as you know, at the last minute, Jesse's lawyers called and said that they had evidence to postpone the grand jury that they wanted to provide to us. It was at that time that they called us, and I met with them, with a team of our detectives, and essentially they gave us no new information. So I reported that back to the state's attorney's office, and it was at that time that we locked in both of these witnesses to the grand jury. I'm told they did an excellent job, and then the state's attorney's office approved charges against Jesse for the Class 4 disorderly conduct, false police.
And that was the Chicago police commander talking about the nature of the investigation, and also talking about the two individuals that he referred to at one point as victims and then as witnesses. I want to bring in Ronn Blitzer and talk a little bit about this. So what we know now is that that Jussie Smollett may have provided these individuals with money in order to assist them. I'm not sure that they're victims. I believe I'm comfortable in saying that they're active participants. So that might play as an issue if they become the witnesses in this case. You agree?
Yeah, to a degree. The word victim or victimized has been thrown around a lot lately in relation to these two individuals. I personally don't see it that way because they were willing participants. Now, I don't know the arrangement that was initially made. I don't know how much information they had about. They knew that he was then going to file a report and do this whole thing. They may not have known the whole plan. And if they didn't know the whole plan, then you can't really accuse them of being involved in a false report.
But yeah, I agree with you. One does have to say to yourself, what did they think was going to happen? They're purchasing rope. They're staging. They're practicing that. If you accept it to be true, they're accepting money for it. One would only assume that there was something fugazi going on in terms of
for sure. But if the only charge against Smollett himself is the false report, then you can't really put that on them. Plus, they're the reason they got the whole thing to begin with against Smollett. So you have some leniency.
Thank you. We'll be right back with more discussion about this.